All right, we can go ahead and get started. So welcome to AKS Office Hours. My name is Dave Strable. You can connect with me on Twitter at Dave_Strable. Also recently authored a Kubernetes best practices book. And also with us is Kendall Roden.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining. We really appreciate it. I'm on the same team as Dave at Microsoft, so the Cloud Native Global Black Belt team. I'm also pretty involved in the Kubernetes community. This is my third release cycle to be a part of, so helping out on the enhancement side. And then if you're interested in just learning more about Azure, I'm a co-host on the Azure podcast. So we just did a couple cool episodes, so definitely check that out anywhere you listen to your podcasts.
Awesome. All right, so why AKS Office Hours? Really, this is a time to provide customers with updates that are pertaining to AKS, but also other things within the open source ecosystem. Typically, how the meeting goes is we do some updates on AKS and the ecosystem and host a short talk with demos and also open Q&As during the call. It's really also to collect feedback from customers, issues, blockers, or specific features that you want to deep dive on. So we're always open to feedback of what you would like to see on these calls, and we can make sure that we cover off on those topics. Feel free to, ask questions in the chat. If you do you can come off mute too. Just make sure there's a little, Teams has a little hand up in the top right-hand corner. You can use that just so we're not talking over each other in that.
Yeah, and Dave, just to add on there, I know that some of you probably joined in our first call last week, but within the next couple of sessions, we will be taking some time to get feedback from everyone that's joining. So we kind of wanted to build back up the attendance for 2021, but there will be a session specifically where we ask all of you what topics you want to hear about so that we can tailor some of the content toward the most relevant topics. So just keep that on the radar. I'll make sure that I update that on the GitHub page when that's going to happen.
All right, so today we will do AKS and ecosystem updates. The ecosystem updates are a little light. This topic here is totally wrong, and that is totally my fault, not updating that. But we do have the product management team here today for Application Gateway Ingress Controller. So we'll deep dive into that. And if we have time, we will dedicate some time to the Ask Anything. This is where it's an open forum discussion to ask any questions, around AKS, Kubernetes in general, and even questions in the kind of open source ecosystem. Also, again, I mentioned two-way interaction. We want this to be interactive, so please, ask questions, get involved in the call. Our office hours is hosted primarily by our GBB team, which stands for our Global Black Belt team, which focuses on cloud native. But it's also supported from our product group too. As you'll see today, we do have one of our product groups on. All the recording content will be available post-call, so if you don't, if you miss one of these or you only get to stay for half of it, we do post them all on YouTube, so you can go back and watch those. If you do have, any thoughts, ideas, whether those, is constructive criticism or just general questions, please reach out to us at aksofficehours@microsoft.com. All right, so AKS updates. So the Azure, one thing to note here is the Azure Kubernetes Service, the pod security policy that was in preview. It's a service that is not going to GA. The feature will be retired May 31st. Reason being is that Upstream has decided not to take pod security policy too stable and will be deprecated in coming up versions. I believe it's slated for 1.22 or 1.23. So if you do need those pod security policy features, look at Azure Policy for Kubernetes. It's an implementation of Gatekeeper that can implement those same pod security policies. There's already the built-in policies for that. So take a look at that if you do need pod security policy feature. AKS now supports every CPU-based SKU dynamically, meaning that before, a lot of times if we had a new SKU come into Azure, it wasn't automatically supported by AKS. So now any new, I shouldn't say any because there are going to be very specialized SKUs that we have within Azure that are not supported on AKS. But for majority of the time, any new SKUs that are added in will be automatically added, so you can choose those new SKUs. AKS Cluster Autoscaler added some additional configuration you can set for max node provision time and priority properties. The cluster autoscaler now exposes a lot of the different configurations you may use. Typically, just keeping with the standard is good, but there can be use cases out there where you would want to optimize how the cluster autoscaler works. AKS now supports in public preview custom node configuration. So this allows you to customize some of the properties for the kubelet or even the Linux OS. Like same thing, cluster autoscaler. Generally, the defaults are good enough, but there are instances for your workload where you may want to configure these specific features on the node. AKS now supports private clusters created with no private DNS zone, meaning that if you've ever provisioned a private AKS cluster, it automatically created a private DNS zone. So now you can actually defer all DNS to your own managed DNS server. And that, I believe, that will be in preview. Azure AD Pod Identity add-on is now in public preview. I will say they are working on a V2 of the Pod Identity that's more scalable. The biggest issue with the current Pod Identity only supports, I believe, up to 50 identities there. So there will be a V2 that comes out at a later date. So keep on a lookout for that. Kubernetes 1.20 will also be in preview. That is actually landing on our next release. So just in a couple days here, you will see Kubernetes 1.20 to in the port, or when you deploy your cluster, you can choose that. But keep in mind, it is in preview currently.
Well, there was a question on one of the updates. Can we set proxy and no proxy settings using the custom node configuration? I don't know if you can see the chat window, so just wanted to call that a question.
I haven't seen totally all the properties. When I finish this ecosystem updates, I'll put a link to that has all the different configurations currently.
Cool.
If you don't see it in there, I would highly recommend it if you use the AKS GitHub issues is to put those type of things in there if there's a specific feature you want, because our product group does actively monitor that. So if it is something you don't see in there, always put in those GitHub issues. That way we can take a look at adding that feature. Ecosystem updates, like I said, very light this week. IstioCon, this is the first ever IstioCon. There has previously been service mesh cons, which were more generic and what talks were there on different service meshes. But IstioCon has started their own virtual conference that will be February 22nd to the 25th. I think they have like 40 different talks with different keynotes. It does look like a good event, so definitely check that out. I believe it's a free event. If it's not, it's a very minimal cost. Grafana Labs has actually a new free plan, and a lot of people equate Grafana to just the the Grafana product, but Grafana Labs actually has a lot of monitoring and logging type tools. Grafana Labs has a hosted free plan for Managed Prometheus. It also adds in their logging capabilities with Loki, and there's also a tracing capability that they have that is in beta right now also. Their new free plan actually does give you, it does give you quite a bit of capacity for being free. So if you want to check that out, it's super easy to get started with Prometheus and Loki doing it that way. So definitely check that out. All right, that is the end of the updates for this week. So now I'm going to hand it over, and we will talk about Application Gateway Ingress Controller.
Great, thanks, Dave. Let me share my screen. PowerPoint. Give me 1 second. Okay, let me just share my entire screen then. Okie dokes. Let's see. Swap. Okay. Great. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Hey, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So hi, I'm Kat. I'm one of the PMs on the Application Gateway team, and I work on App Gateway as well as Application Gateway Ingress Controller. And today I'm joined with me by Akshay Gupta, who is one of the devs that has built and contributed a lot to App Gateway as well as AGIC. If you've seen the AGIC GitHub, you've probably seen his name a lot.
Hello, everyone.
So thanks for joining, Akshay. Okay, so in terms of agenda for today, I figured that we could first cover a little bit of an overview of like what is Application Gateway, just because AGIC depends on App Gateway and works very closely with App Gateway itself. And then I wanted to talk about AGIC itself, give an overview of how it works, talk through real quick some AGIC use cases, since there are sort of 2 ways to deploy AGIC right now. And then go through what an AGIC add-on greenfield installation would look like, and then finally touch on the roadmap for what's next in terms of the AGIC side. All right, so in terms of Application Gateway itself, Application Gateway or App Gateway is a layer 7 load balancer, and so it can load balance HTTP traffic, and it's built to be highly available, zone redundant, and scalable. App Gateway itself can be set in a manual mode in terms of when you set the number of instances. It can also be set to be auto-scaled. And so if you see here on the diagram here, you can choose to set the minimum and the maximum capacity, and App Gateway will be able to auto-scale out by itself. And so that's what we mean by scalability here. App Gateway also supports a public IP or private IP or both, depending on what your use cases are. So you can serve internet traffic as well as intranet traffic, and the IP itself is a static VIP. App Gateway supports a variety of backends, so it's fairly flexible in terms of what you want to put behind App Gateway itself. You can put VMs or VMSS, VM scale set, AKS cluster. It could just be a public IP. You could put cloud services, or you could load balance to another load balancer, internal load balancer, Azure load balancer, or you can also force tunnel traffic back on premises if you still have traffic on-prem. And you can do any combination of these backends, really. But obviously today we'll be focusing on AKS as a backend to App Gateway. And finally, App Gateway also has built-in security and SSL management features. App Gateway has a built-in WAF, a web application firewall. It's also one of the benefits of using App Gateway with AGIC, which we'll touch on later. But App Gateway can also handle SSL offload, SSL re-encryption, and you can set your own SSL policy, that custom SSL policies if you want on the App Gateway itself. So in terms of some, just cover this real quick, some of the layer 7 load balancing capabilities that App Gateway has, just because this also sort of ties into how you can use AGIC. We're able to do URL path-based routing as well as host-based routing. And we currently have wildcard support that's in public preview. That'll be going GA soon, fairly. Right now we support round robin to the back end. We also have session affinity, and so you can, or cookie affinity. We support redirection as well as header rewrite and URL rewrite. URL rewrite is currently in public preview as well, along with wildcard listener support, both of which will be going GA in the next couple months at the latest. We also support WebSocket and HTTP2 traffic, as well as connection draining to your backends and custom error pages, depending on what you want to show your customers. And so the diagram here shows this is, path-based routing as opposed to host-based routing on the bottom diagram, and how you can split your traffic to the different backends behind the app gateway. And we also see here that we have an integrated WAF built in for additional protection. So now that we have some idea of what is Application Gateway itself, let's talk about App Gateway Ingress Controller, or AGIC. So the diagram here on the right basically shows you how AGIC works. AGIC is this little pod here within the AKS cluster itself. And so what AGIC does is it listens for any updates, events from the API server within the AKS cluster whenever a pod spins up or a pod is spun down. And it takes those updates and creates an app gateway configuration, basically, and sends it to Azure ARM, which then applies this new configuration to App Gateway so that it's aware of any changes within the AKS cluster. And then App Gateway is able to just talk directly to the pods. And that's where our performance benefits come in over traditional in-cluster ingress controllers, because App Gateway itself has the pod IPs within its backends and is able to reach the pods directly. Of course, you can have Azure Key Vault integrated with App Gateway, and so that's basically how the whole system works. AGIC itself isn't in the data path between App Gateway and the pods. I think that's one of the main differences between AGIC and other ingress controllers. Oops. Right now, AGIC can be deployed either through Helm or as an AKS add-on. The AGIC deployed through Helm has been GA since November 2019, and AGIC deployed as an AKS add-on is currently in public preview, and we're planning on going GA fairly soon as well for that. The benefits, which I'll cover some more in the other slide, but some of the benefits of, or if anything, the main benefit of the AKS add-on version of AGIC is that it allows for a one-line deployment of the AKS cluster as well as the add-on and the application gateway, which I'll show you in the greenfield tutorial at the end. But it simplifies the deployment down significantly from deploying through Helm, and so it's one of the easier makes the setup a lot easier. In terms of, the overall benefit also of the add-on is that it's a fully managed way to integrate your layer 7 load balancing with your AKS cluster. And it also helps you load balance if you have, VMSS that your application is currently running on and you're moving to AKS. App Gateway is able to load balance across both, and therefore using AGIC allows you to have this sort of managed solution within Azure to load balance across those two backends. All right, so in terms of AGIC features, I see a question in the chat about KubeNet and CNI. So that's the sort of the first point that we wanted to mention, is that AGIC itself supports Azure CNI as well as the KubeNet. The one thing to note about KubeNet is that there's an additional step that you need to do to associate a route table to the App Gateway subnet, so that App Gateway is able to route the traffic to the pods if you're using KubeNet, but it's fully supported. AGIC itself also supports Azure as well as Calico's network policies. And of course, there's a integrated WAF benefit on the application gateway, and AGIC supports that. So if you're using a WAF app gateway, there's no additional steps that you need to take to get it to work together. Horizontal pod autoscaling is also supported. And again, the benefit of being able to mix VMs or VMSS and AKS clusters behind the app gateway is another benefit of using AGIC. And finally, HTTP, HTTPS, HTTP2, and WebSocket front-end is another benefit of using, or AGIC, if anything, a benefit of using App Gateway, because App Gateway supports that. So in terms of the benefits itself, AGIC, as mentioned earlier in the diagram, allows App Gateway to talk directly to the AKS pods, and there's nothing else within the data path, and so that allows you to see some performance benefits, as well as because unlike other traditional in-cluster ingress controllers that use up additional resources within your AKS cluster, AGIC is only one pod, and it doesn't require more than just one pod within your AKS cluster, and so it sort of separates compute resources from actually processing your traffic within the AKS cluster, because it allows App Gateway to handle all of the heavy lifting with the SSL offload, and the traditional layer 7 load balancing capabilities are all fronted by the App Gateway, and so your AKS cluster is able to pretty much be completely dedicated to just processing your traffic itself and serving the traffic. As I'll show you in the demo, there's basically a one-line deployment of the AGIC add-on through Azure CLI, and if any of you guys have deployed through Helm before, you'll know that's a significant improvement and makes life just a lot easier. It's fully supported by Microsoft, and so I think that's another main benefit of AGIC. Regardless of if you're deploying through Helm or the add-on, you're always able to create a support ticket, and Microsoft support will be able to help you, and eventually if support can't help you, then people like Akshay will be able to help you debug your problems and make sure that that your application is not affected by any issues. And yeah, you also have a line of communication to us through the AKS team, and especially GitHub issues on our GitHub. Final benefit of AGIC, one of the things that's nice is that we also integrate with Grafana as well as Prometheus. And so if you don't want to use Azure Monitor, then Grafana and Prometheus is also a great way of viewing your metrics. And so being able to see your metrics any way that you want, basically, whether it's Azure Monitor, Grafana, or Prometheus, allows you as a customer a lot of flexibility for sort of managing AGIC and also viewing it. So just to touch briefly on the sort of different use cases between deploying through Helm and add-on, we'll be making this also clear in our documentation. I think clearer than it is right now, but currently, the main differences between deploying through Helm and add-on is the sort of mapping between clusters and AGICs and App Gateway. Right now, if you're deploying through Helm, we support multi-clusters. So if you have an AGIC per cluster, we support multi-cluster pointing to one application gateway through the use of our prohibited targets CRD, which basically allows you to tell each AGIC to only configure a portion of the app gateway. By default, AGIC assumes full control of the app gateway that it's talking to and it's pointed to. And so if you have multiple AGICs pointing it to the same app gateway, then you will need to make sure that they don't overwrite each other, and therefore that's what prohibited targets is for. We also allow multiple AGICs per cluster to talk to a single app gateway, and so if you have a use case where you need multiple ingress controllers within one cluster, and you want that all to configure the same app gateway, that's also possible, deployed through Helm. The main, since add-on is currently in preview, we currently allow you to have one AGIC per cluster per app gateway, and so it's a one-to-one mapping, and so the many-to-one mapping is something that is something that we'll be adding to the add-on in the future. But if you need that many to one mapping right off the bat, then we would recommend going with the Helm deployment for now. Cool. Also, thank you, Akshay, for answering questions in the chat. We can use time at the end to answer additional questions in the chat, just because I see a constant stream, and I know Akshay's only able to keep up with so many. But real quick, let's go over the installation of AGIC add-on itself in Greenfield, and what I was talking about with the sort of one-line deployment. So the first thing that you would need to do is, obviously, since it's in preview, make sure you set up Azure CLI correctly. You need to install the preview extension on Azure CLI, and then register the add-on feature flag. You only need to do this once per subscription while this is in preview, and you won't need to do this once this is GA. And then after you do that, you'll need to refresh the registration of the resource provider, and then you should be good to go. Once you do that, this is sort of where the one line, or I guess almost two line deployment comes in. The first line is creating a resource group itself. If you already have an existing resource group, then you don't have to obviously run this step. And then the second, the line to deploy basically everything at once is the second line here, where you define your cluster name within the resource group that you just created, and then a few other parameters, as well as the name of your application gateway that you want created, the App Gateway subnet that you want it to be created with. This sort of defines the add-on itself, and then once you run that, this will deploy a new AKS cluster with the AGIC add-on automatically enabled in that, and it'll also deploy an App Gateway ready to be configured and connected by the AGIC add-on. And so there's no additional steps that you need to run here to like connect the AGIC to the App Gateway at this point. It deploys all three at once, the AKS cluster add-on and an App Gateway, and everything's pretty much ready to go from day one. And so if we look at if you were to look at your portal after deploying this, you'd see my cluster shows up in my resource group 1, which is what we had named our resource group here. My resource group 1 location is in East US. And so the cluster is up and running, which is great. And then we go to the MC resource group, the corresponding sort of resource group, and we see my application gateway has been deployed, which is what we had called our app gateway. And it has the public IP address already attached, and everything is basically configured, ready to go here. And then the next step would just be to deploy an application. And so, get the credentials for the cluster that that you just deployed, or that you want to deploy the application on, and then apply kubectl apply, the actual application itself. I just deployed a sample app. This is all within our tutorial online. And then you can do a quick check to see that the IP matches the front-end IP of the app gateway. So if you run kubectl ingress, actually, let's look at the front-end IP of the app gateway first. It's 20.72.130.68. And also, one thing to note is that if your app gateway is currently being controlled or was created by AGIC, it'll have this tag that says created by Ingress App Gateway. And so this will help you sort of differentiate, at least between app gateways that you created yourself versus were created by the add-on itself. And so if we run kubectl get ingress, then we can see that the that the IP matches the front-end IP of the app gateway. And so if we put that in to our browser, then we see that the application is up and running. And there were no, trust me when I say there were no additional steps that I did between running this line to create everything and running these few lines to actually apply the application itself. So makes the deployment a lot simpler, and that's pretty much what one of the main benefits of the add-on itself. In terms of the roadmap, so just looking ahead, the next few things on our plate, as mentioned before, the AKS add-on going GA, so fully supported by Microsoft at that point. We're also looking to add header rewrite and URL rewrite parity. Header rewrite, we know, has been one of our top asks on our GitHub, and is something that we're working on and have committed to work on over the next 6 months. URL rewrite is also, since it's a new feature on App Gateway, that's something that we're also working to get parity on for AGIC itself. One of our top priorities and commitments for this semester also is to work on getting faster updates out to AGIC, and so that's basically if there's an AKS update, then that gets applied to the App Gateway much faster than it is right now. Akshay can speak probably more to that if there are any questions for that. And finally, we're planning on releasing 1.4 fairly soon. So all the links below are to resources that might help. So our GitHub is linked below. And if you have any issues that, isn't like a support ticket, it's more of a question or like, when is this feature going to be supported? You can always open an issue on our GitHub linked there. If you're curious about what other features we're planning to update our AGIC with, then the roadmap, which is essentially the project on the GitHub, is linked there as well. And then for documentation, keep an eye out for updated docs once the add-on goes GA and for the GA announcement. But everything is linked below. And that's all for me. So seeing a lot of questions. Actually, I don't know if there's anything that you want to address.
I'm just going line by line.
Yeah. I think one of the last questions is AGIC open source? Yes, AGIC is open source. Please help and contribute and make it better. And we'd love to work together with you to make AGIC better for you. Does the AGIC controller automatically configure the route when the pod is created? Yes. Yes, that's one of the benefits, is that like when a pod is created, AGIC is aware of that from the API server. So if we go back, if a pod is spun up, then the API server will send an event. AGIC picks it up and then reconfigures the app gateway to be aware of a new pod that is spun up.
Can I ask a question here?
Yes, please do.
Okay, I'm trying to ask this question. So currently, AGIC is listening to Ingress objects and then configures the AGIC controller. Is there a way to like do this with service mesh objects, like a gateway or a virtual service? And I think Akshay kind of picked this up as well in the chat, saying, Kubernetes networking SIG is also trying to create a new definition of gateway. But I'm more thinking like if you have a service mesh installed and you're not using regular Ingress objects, what would be the best way to use AGIC with like Istio or Linkerd?
So I think Fahim, at least for Istio, we had like done a small alpha that we were trying out, but that is like still in alpha stage. For service mesh, we do have integration, at least for service mesh, open service mesh project, the OSM project that we had. So there you can just write off the box. AGIC works with OSM. For Istio and Linkerd, one of the cases that we think right now, basically what we are working on is basically having the health probes work with how Istio configures the readiness probe. So that is one thing that we are solving over there. And also MTLS is one thing that we will be looking forward to in having an application gateway so that we can have a better integration with service meshes as we go further. In terms of supporting gateway objects and virtual gateway objects, those are right now not in our roadmap. Given that like even the Kubernetes SIG community, networking SIG community is coming up with a new spec for Ingress. So we are looking forward to all the service mesh basically converge toward that new API.
Okay, thank you.
So it looks like we have a couple questions in the chat kind of about the relationship between App Gateway and the API management solution in Azure. Would either of y'all want to touch on kind of what you see that story looking like?
Yeah, so for Azure API management, the short answer is that it doesn't support Azure API management, and that it's I guess one of my questions would be like, where are you planning to use API management in front of App Gateway or behind App Gateway? Because I guess if it's behind App Gateway, AGIC talks specifically between AKS and App Gateway, and so API management wouldn't really fit in there. But you could use API management in front of App Gateway, and yeah, as long as App Gateway is able to reach AKS, that's sort of the environment that the AGIC was built for.
I have a quick question.
Yep.
So we currently use AKS with the internal only load balancer. So can we spin this up with only for internal services?
Yeah. Sorry, Akshay, do you want to say something?
No, I think you were going to say this, right? Like you can create an application gateway with in just an internal mode. That way, no traffic will be able to come to App Gateway. And you can then use that application gateway with AGIC to configure your routing rules.
So we don't need to provision App Gateway separately. So in the ingress manifest itself, we can just say / your load balancer internal, and it will have its own annotation for App Gateway, and it will automatically spin up App Gateway. Is that how it would work?
No, currently it doesn't work like that. Like if you do that through the service object, it will only provision a layer 4 load balancer. It will not provision application gateway. So the way you would approach this is you would create an application gateway separately, or you can use the add-on. And what you can do is then add a private IP to the application gateway. And later on, when you are writing your ingress rules over there, you can add an annotation saying that use private IP, and you can say the value is true. What that will do is it will force AGIC to make all the routing rules on the application gateway using the private IP.
Thank you. I have one more question on the the maintenance of the AGIC resource. So what does the troubleshooting experience looks like? Let's say Microsoft refreshes its TLS certificates for all past services, App Gateway, APIM, and all that. And suddenly I start getting SSL handshake errors. So how does the troubleshooting experience look like? I mean, I saw Grafana and Prometheus, but that will be for the AGIC component itself. I was just interested in looking at things, especially when you're using things like Calico, App Gateway, APIM, and AGIC. What is the recommended course of action for troubleshooting?
So your scenario is where a certificate is probably rotated, right? And
yeah, that was just one example scenario, right? It could be either rotated or it could be like some other problem, but I just wanted to know like how it integrates well with Azure's own monitoring tools, or if it may be out of scope and that is totally fine, but I was just curious to know what the troubleshooting experience is looking like.
Okay, so I think what you will see over here is if you the experience that you have with application gateway in terms of whatever debugging tools are available will stay the same whether you're using AGIC or not. AGIC is over here using public APIs to configure application gateway using your ingress rules as a reference, but most of the experience on the application gateway side will remain the same. So if you go on the portal, the way you used to debug issues with application gateway in a normal setup where you had VMs, you would do the same kind of debugging on application gateway when you have pods as backends. The only thing that is changing in this setup is that instead of a user configuring application gateway, it is the ingress controller configuring the application gateway, and the backends are pod IPs rather than normal VMSS IPs.
Thank you. Thank you.
There was a quick question earlier from Robert asking about when KubeNet had been supported. I believe we've always supported KubeNet. I've pasted a link in the chat with some documentation on how to set up the UDR for the KubeNet scenarios. And so if you run into any problems with KubeNet, please do open an issue. We should have always supported KubeNet with AGIC. And in the link scenario 3 specifically for V2 of App Gateway is where the instructions for setting up the route table for KubeNet is.
Adding to that, I think one of the things that we didn't have in the documentation was how to correctly set up KubeNet before, because KubeNet was supported from the beginning. The only thing that was missing was how to correctly set up the route tables, because in KubeNet, pods are not first-class citizens of the network. There's a route table that is created by AKS and attached to the subnet of AKS nodes. Now, in the documentation, we have added that now you can take this route table and attach it to application gateway subnet. And that way, when packets leave app gateway subnet for a pod IP, it will know what node to land on. So that is the part that we have now added in the documentation. But KubeNet support was already there. It was only lacking in the documentation.
Can I ask a quick question around KubeNet and user-defined routing? Because we had an issue where if we tried to create a user-defined route with like a 000/0 with the next hop pointing to our, and this is connected to express route, but pointing to our virtual gateway with Terraform, the route would not populate properly. So we ended up having to do kind of a hack where we create an empty route table and associate it with the subnet just for BGP to be able to populate the route table properly, because basically our default routes for BGP were getting like jacked up whenever we tried to add our own. Is that expected, or is that kind of a bug with a workaround that you guys are looking into changing that behavior?
So over here, you are saying that when you're running Terraform and you're trying to add a route, UDR route to the route table, there is no route table, and you have to then create a fake, like a empty route table.
Well, so the instructions basically, so the API expects a 0, the Azure API expects a 0.0.0.0/0 route to be there. And that's fine if you're using like an Azure firewall and you do your next hop being that virtual appliance, but we don't have an Azure firewall at all. And so in BGP populates that default route for us. The default route's already there, but if I don't have a if I don't have a route table, a custom route table on that subnet that AKS is being deployed on, the Azure API complains and it won't let me go any further. If I try to create one and then create my own 0.0.0 route that points to the virtual gateway, that doesn't work either. It still fails to deploy. So what I have to do is create the route table, but don't populate it with any routes, and then let BGP still come in and populate the 0.0.0.0/0 route. And so as long as I do it that way, routing across the express route works. But if I try to follow your documentation, it doesn't work. So this basically Steve Griffith, I don't know if you guys work with him at all, but from Microsoft, he was the one who recommended just create an empty route table and see if that works. And I did, and it does, and we're fine. It's just it doesn't feel like the right way to build the network for AKS to route properly. Does that make sense?
I think you're following a documentation. Do you have a link for that? Maybe we can try it ourselves and just do a repro and see how we can solve this.
Yeah, like I said, it is working, but again, we have to create an empty route table and associate it with the subnet that AKS is deploying on for BGP to populate the routes properly, and for the AKS cluster to actually even deploy successfully when using KubeNet and basically outbound type of UDR.
You're saying that
instead of
even deploying AKS cluster is fails. I guess that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Maybe can you share your Terraform commands or whatever you're using over here? Maybe you can reach out to the AKS team and see if there's an issue.
I think this would be a great opportunity. We can connect the two of you after. John, I'll grab your email and maybe we can connect and try to troubleshoot that a bit.
Okay. Yeah. Again, it is working, but it feels like we have a workaround in place instead of maybe the way it should be.
Yeah, and it definitely doesn't sound like that's how it should behave. So thanks for the feedback.
Sure.
Hi, does App Gateway now support UDRs on the application gateway subnet?
No, so we don't support the UDR to route 0/0 virtual appliance or an NVA or force tunneling yet on V2 specifically. This is something that we're planning to work on this. I just can't give like a solid ETA for it, but this is something that we know is a lacking on the App Gateway V2 and is something that we're planning to work on.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, our current scenario is we are just following the AKS is mostly used for internal microservices. So we have an Azure firewall, which we may move away from in the near future, but we have a single subnet dedicated for AKS, and that's where the internal load balancer that talks to the Nginx Ingress is located. So the Ingress was spun up by the Ingress. So if we were to migrate that same scenario with App Gateway with this AGIC, understand the part about spinning up application gateway separately first, before you start with AGIC. But because of this scenario, I mean the UDR scenario, because everything to and out of AKS has to go through the Azure firewall. Firewall, right? So thank you. Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, makes sense.
One quick question over here. I think everything that is going out to the internet, right? But if it is a packet coming through App Gateway, it would be from a subnet in the same VNet.
Well, for the same VNet, we are planning to do Calico. So our thing is we are evaluating it, but the current version of Calico in AKS is like from almost a year and a half years old. So we wanted to see how does the Calico experience look like. So we are just looking at use Calico because we thought we could use it with Flux and just keep our network policies minimal. But so the overall strategy is use an external firewall for stuff outside of AKS and use Calico or Kubernetes network policies for pod to pod, namespace to namespace level traffic, right? So, which is why, I mean, like with this one, I mean, we would like to see how AGIC would integrate with Calico as well. I don't know if that's what you were asking, but our overall,
at least from AGIC side, you won't have any traffic coming from AGIC to the pods. So you don't have any AGIC to any other pod traffic. You would only have packets like AGIC will talk to the API server. That is one communication, and second communication will be to the ARM APIs, Azure Resource Manager APIs. That will be an external call, and that can be added as a policy to allow on firewall.
Understood. Thank you.
One other question that I saw earlier in the chat, going up a little bit, two questions. Are we going to support two front-end IPs listening on the same port? Yes, the supporting private and public IP on the same port is something that we've committed to completing in the next 6 months, so sometime before end of June 2021. And so that is something that should be done by then, and is something that we're working on. And then the modification, the header rewrite, that's something that was on our roadmap and is something that we've also committed to working on in the next 6 months. So both of these should be done before the second half of this calendar year. Going through the questions above, but are there any other questions that people have in the meantime?
I had asked if it was possible to deploy the App Gateway with WAF enabled rather than having to go and configure that after the fact.
Akshay, do you want to speak to that?
Oh, you mean enabling WAF through AGIC?
Yeah, just because otherwise it's hard to do it in a single ARM template, since you can't deploy the AKS cluster and use the add-on to create the application gateway and then also configure the application gateway to have WAF in that same template.
Oh, okay. I think that's a really good feedback. Let me get to this and see if there's a better way of doing this.
Okay, yeah, I have a very hacky way of doing it that involves nested deployments to pass properties back and forth and effectively patch the object. But been working with a group where they want to use the add-on because it means they don't need owner access because they don't need to do any security in order to deploy the app gateway. So it really saves them a lot of effort there, but they can't turn on WAF in the same template. So.
Got it. I think one of the easiest way, which I see is the easiest way to implement is we already support adding a WAF policy. We already have an annotation for adding a WAF policy to the application gateway. In the same implementation, we can also have enable the SKU. Like
yeah, that would work.
It is not
if there was, turn on WAF and apply this policy, that would be a great solution.
Got it. I have taken this.
Also, if AGIC is enabled using the AZCLI or Terraform or ARM, would the AGIC images be auto-updated? Like whenever there is a new update, say to App Gateway or AGIC, will it be automatically updated and managed by Microsoft? As opposed to if we go through the Helm option, we can version control it.
Yeah, that's correct. So if you deploy the add-on specifically through AZCLI or however you want to deploy it, then that would be managed by Microsoft. But if you want to have control of the version of AGIC itself, then that would be through Helm.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yep.
Kat, it looks like maybe there was a few more questions that popped up in the chat. I know we're coming up toward the end of time, so we won't maybe get to every single one, but it looks like a question around plans for supporting ports other than 80 and 443, and if AGIC runs as a non-root user.
Akshay, do you?
Yeah, I can go ahead with those two. So port 80 and 443, so we already have a new annotation called override front-end port that can be used to provide a port that you want to use on the listener. So that should be available right now. So you can look that up on the GitHub repository. The second question is, does AGIC run as non-root user? So this one is, I think we are using root user for reading the cloud provider config. And that is only accessible through you having root user access. But I think it is not mandatory to have that file because most of the things that we really need are coming through the Helm config. And we already have a PR on removing the non-root user section, like the root user section in the AGIC deployment YAML. So maybe in the next release, this is something that we can take in.
Thanks. That's great news.
There was a question about multi-tenant scenario. I'm not. Could whoever asked it kind of clarify the multi-tenant part? Is it multi-tenant across like Azure, or is it multiple subscriptions? Or I guess sorry. It'd be helpful to get clarity on the tenant part of that. Across namespaces in Kubernetes. Yeah, I mean, we support multiple, like we support using AGIC across variety, like across multiple namespaces within like an AKS cluster. It just depends on, I guess, like how you're using the namespaces to separate your application within these services within the Kubernetes cluster itself. But
all right. Well, thanks everyone so much. I know we're coming up on time. We have about 4 minutes left. So just wanted to give a big shout out to our program managers and Kat and Akshay for joining today. It was really informative. Hopefully everyone got their questions answered. If you didn't, feel free to drop those in. We can follow up after the call. So yeah, thanks again for joining. I will make sure that the recording gets posted today. It looks like maybe there's one more question that popped in, so we may be able to get to that in just a second. But I'll make sure the recording's up today. Kat, I'll get the slides from you if you're cool with me putting these up on the site as well. Just a really big reminder, if you don't already have the reoccurring calendar invite, you can download that from the GitHub page and just check in that later today or tomorrow for the recording, and I'll link all of the links for the content around AGIC in the actual links on the GitHub page as well. So I'll pass it back over to y'all to see if y'all wanna answer that last question. But other than that, just thanks again everyone for joining today.
Akshay, do you want to speak to eBPF? Any plans to support eBPF?
So eBPF, and I think the context is basically for the AGIC pod. And if that is the question, then since AGIC is control plane, there is no need to have eBPF be on AGIC itself. And application gateway is the data plane over here, and it's outside of the AKS cluster. So I guess this question might be out of scope for that.
Sounds good. Great. Yeah. Thanks so much, everyone, for attending. Please shoot us any other questions. And looking forward to connecting over GitHub probably. All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.